This ought to be a good one. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. I saw this one hit reverb, instantly said, yes, let's document it. It's been a really long time since we've had a true Stage 4 on the show, and if you don't understand what I mean, you soon will. Look at old Smoky here. This is what I'm going to call literal tobacco burst, because it's all ambered over from the tar and smoke, and you know, it actually started life as a tobacco burst. Just look at that headstock. So on my show, I teach that there's 4 stages in a guitar's life. Stage 1 is when it's brand spanking new, it's got that great high gloss finish. That is when a guitar is probably worth the most and it's the easiest to sell. Stage 2 is when that new guitar gets its first couple nicks and dings. It's got some minor play wear, but you can no longer call it a mint condition brand new guitar. So Stage 3 is when it gets more wear and tear, and typically that's when a guitar is worth the least. You might have a gouge on the side of the headstock or a discoloration somewhere on the finish. Those guitars typically have the smallest market. But eventually, if you keep playing and playing a Stage 3 and it ages in a really cool way, it's been played heavily, you get lots of wear, it starts to become cool again, if it has the right look. And that's all subjective. These are the guitars that brand new relicking jobs aim to recreate, because this is something you can't just buy. There's only so many examples. So you're probably curious, how exactly did the finish get so ambered over here? This sat in a cigar shop for 30 years. I mean, look how dark the finish is over top of the edge of the binding, but yet the plastic itself has also yellowed with age. It's almost like you just have multiply binding going on, but you can see where the finish has been worn through on the edges. This must be one heck of a player, because that's another reason why people love Stage 4s. Typically, if a guitar gets played this much, it's gotta be awesome. Another way a finish can amber over like this is sometimes in really humid countries, it just affects it. But that is not the tale of this one. And here's the other side of the coin to true Stage 4s. They don't age like this anymore, because all the areas where guitars would experience smoke, you know, bars and everything, that's not as prevalent nowadays. So this is something that could really only happen in a certain period of time. And until somebody figures out a way to age guitars like this and still look good, you have to find the real deal. And usually when they're so good, people don't want to sell them. So kind of a supply and demand thing if you want a real relic. But very cool to have literal tobacco burst. All right, so what is this thing? Well, it's a Gibson Les Paul Custom. How can we tell? We got binding on the top and the back. We've got our mother of pearl block inlays with an ebony fretboard, and we've got all our custom stuff up here. If you know how to read English, it says it right there on the truss rod cover. But now we need to figure out what year it is. It actually does have a 3-piece top. It's just really hard to see, but there's your 2 seam lines. It's got speed knobs, and they're looking fantastic. So that tells us it'll likely be somewhere between the years 1978 till 1985. We've got a slightly pointy cutaway horn, so that also puts us in those eras, as does our 3-piece neck, which we can see straight through because the finish has been worn. But most importantly, our serial number tells us it was made in 1981, the 99th day, production number 601. So it was the 102nd guitar made in Nashville that particular day. So I know what you're thinking. This thing probably absolutely reeks. And this is one of those few times where I was okay buying like a super smoky guitar, because, you know, this thing is just a vibe. However, no, there's honestly not much smell to this. It does feel a little bit grimy, but I'm scared if I polish it, you'll kind of lose that worn down vibe to it. Like it'll become too shiny, so I'm kind of conflicted on this one. And you know what? I bet you couldn't even get all the gunk off of this if you tried. So let's go ahead and throw this one over on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs, see what might have been changed over the years, and find out later if it's a fantastic player and sounds great, or it was just in the smoking section for too long. Let's begin the deep dive on Old Smoky. So all this haziness to the finish. When Gibson utilizes the VOS treatment, which is just a gunk they put over top of the guitar to make it look older, this right here is what they're trying to recreate. It's just not quite as full glossy looking. It doesn't have that lustrous sheen. Aging techniques can only get you so far. But now let's check out our pickups. Miraculously, you still have the 81 Tim Shaw in the neck. And our bridge pickup, it's also your matching Tim Shaw. So it still has the original pickup. Someone just removed and has long lost the golden covers. And usually I like pickup covers, but this one, the black bobbins play off the now black border very well. Technically, if Gibson made a guitar look exactly like this, it would be called Vintage Sunburst because those have the black border. But this did actually start life a brown color. I think anyways, because the pickguard didn't quite shield enough over here to tell, but here you can see a closer to the original color for the rest of the body. Just a nice light honey hue. Now converted to grungy amber. You can also see where the bridge and tailpiece have shielded off some spots too. But here's what our neck pickup cavity looks like on this one. It's a short neck tenon, as is common in this era. And not too much going on in our bridge pickup cavity. However, you do have a few markings, such as a 2, and it looks like a lady's name. That's not uncommon to find in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a secret coding system, I've been told. But you can see the maple top joining onto our mahogany body, but there is still a pancake layer of maple in between the maple and mahogany. But being an 81, you don't have the visible layer along the edges of a mahogany body. And since we have the pickup covers off, we can actually see the white spacers of a Tim Shaw. That is what you're looking for to help identify them. And you want to look for the rough cast magnet on the inside. But check this out. The strings have worn the edge of the pickup ring. That always looks cool when it's naturally done. But now we'll move on to the bridge. It was so corroded on there, I had a hard time getting it off. But I was eventually successful, and I can confirm this is also the original bridge. As is common with bridges in this era, they tend to collapse. If you take a straight edge to one of these bridges and you have a gap, that means the bridge has bent. Now this is far from the worst example I've ever seen, it'll probably still play okay. But if you wanted the best intonation and action, you would probably want to replace that. But here's a look at our tailpiece. All the gold worn off the top, so he must have anchored his hand there when he did play it. But it is the original one. But we've got to take a second to appreciate these knobs. So after about 1985, Gibson changes what the knobs are made out of so they don't age. So thankfully, this one still has the old material, and they just look phenomenal when they amber over like this. Absolutely beautiful. And they actually turn really smoothly. So I have the feeling this thing was kept up with, just not necessarily cleaned. I'm suspicious our toggle switch has been replaced, because that is surprisingly fresh feeling. But we'll have to figure that out on the back. So this thing saw a lot of cigar smoke and tar in the air, but what's unique is you don't honestly have any finish checking so far. Now there is an area where like somebody's bracelet really scratched it up. This is a good example of what makes something a stage 3. Like pretend all the other grunginess wasn't here on this one and it was a brand new, but it got really deeply scratched right there. Instant stage 3. Those are harder to find a buyer for, unless you reduce your price considerably. But I'm at the point where I'm not even sure if that's in the finish or if it's just in the gunk, but something about this one just says don't do your deep cleaning because it might not turn out the way you hope. And I'm all about documenting guitars, so it's nice to see one of these raw. But part of the cool appeal of this one is the fact that the finish is worn in some areas. I was talking about that on the neck earlier, but here you can see an area of the binding that still has the finish over top of it, but this creamy layer is where the finish has been worn off. So like right here, you can see worn off because some guy's arm was resting on it, and then it's slowly starting to expose the maple top right there. But up here is where the strap was rubbing. This thing just has such a weathered look along the edges, and that's part of the appeal to a stage 4/relic. And also take a look over here in our cutaway. I was telling you earlier how sometimes you don't know what finish you actually have. Like, obviously this isn't Cherry Sunburst. And usually when a Silverburst ages, it slightly turns green. But eventually, they can start looking like this too. Takes a long time, but I have seen a couple of those. But no, I can confirm this was a Tobacco Sunburst, because we would have saw otherwise over here. But this is about 2 years before they start weight relieving these, so it's still solid mahogany. And it really doesn't feel like it's going to be too heavy. But let's move on to our 3-piece maple neck with our ebony fretboard. And we've got our block inlays. The frets were actually relatively shiny. You can see this has fret wear up and down. It doesn't look like anything like too ultra deep, but that would depend on your playing preferences if you'd want to get it refretted. But this still looks level recrownable to me, but I could be wrong on that. This era of custom just naturally has low, wide frets. But we've got a 24 3/4 inch scale with a 12-inch fretboard radius. I measure a 1.72 inch nut width, increasing to 2.08 by the 12. First fret neck depth 0.83 and 0.98 by the 12. That makes it sound bigger than it is. It's more of a 60s neck profile, but it's got like a medium profile to it. Here's a look at that neck profile at the 1st fret and 12th fret. Still a rounded C shape though. But there's a good look at the wear pattern over here. Somebody definitely liked to play up until about the 12th fret, you can see. Well, at least with their thumb and the entire other side of the neck. Yeah, I guess they did do some soloing after all, because they've just worn the finish off the entire binding. There it is, the area of worn finish when they're doing their soloing. Outside of the pickup covers, this is actually the first replaced part. Somebody put brass on it. That was super popular to do late 70s, early 80s, and that's exactly when this thing came out. I personally really like brass nuts. I think they look cool. But here's our headstock. You can't tell, but it actually is mother of pearl under there. But here's another fun fact about Stage 4s. It's what actually encouraged the Widowed series of guitars. They would look at these old relics and go, hey, that matching colored binding's actually kind of a cool effect. So they did that. And another area of inspiration from that is when they spray a guitar over, Gibson manually scrapes the finish off the binding again. So that's another area where they got that idea. But guitars like these, you never know how they were stored, what your truss rod condition is going to be like. This one looks perfectly fine. The neck is surprisingly straight. Yeah, that truss rod moves perfectly. It's always scary buying these kinds of guitars sight unseen online. But over here, I do see one of the screws has been replaced for our strap button, so that likely means that's not the original one. It looks pretty close though, so it might just be the screw that was replaced. The one down here looks pretty good. But hey, for all this wear and tear, just missing the pickup covers and a changed nut, and a couple of screws / strap buttons, that's not too bad. But I really like how the binding is exposed just in a few areas on the headstock. It just adds that almost multi-layered bound headstock vibe to it. But get a load of this, our truss rod cover. See how ambered over the edges are? That's insane. That started pure white. Now we'll flip it over to the back and yeah. Oh boy, you can really see what the tar in the air does. Thought you might like to see the pick guard too. Now we'll move on to the backside. I heard a lot of rattling going on in here, so I thought, surely something's been messed with. But no, I think it was actually just dried up buffing compound that was left in here. Here's a look at our solder joints. There's a lot more solder on here than usually is, so it's possible somebody had those pickups in and out at one point in time. This pot dates to the 6th week of 1981. This one, the 1st week of 1980. This one gets covered over, but we can see it's somewhere in 1980. But this one is the 2nd week of 1979. Typically, these two will match and these two will match, so it's possible this one has been replaced. You can also see it's a slightly different style to the other three. Or maybe they were just using old parts. But I'm going to go ahead and err on the side of caution that it was replaced. This is the era when they're still using these shielding plates. But we still have our gold output jack plate. But the toggle switch looks convincing. This has got that whole tobacco haze going on in spades on the back as well, for that aged look that we all love so much. But take a look at this, and now take a look at the neck. I did decide to clean and polish the neck because it was just too grimy for the guy who didn't make the grime to play. And here's what it looks like as you start to wipe some of this off. Like, I could stand here and polish this stuff all day and it would never be clean, but it was just too grimy. And I don't even think I got 1/10 of it off. But this feels so much smoother and nicer to play now. The problem with tar-coated guitars like that is once you start cleaning, you can't really stop. Because it'll start to pick apart your cloth, and then you get hazed over areas. If you start that process, you better be ready to be here for a while. If somebody wanted to clean this, you would definitely have to get some sort of a buffer, because it would just take too long by hand. But man, that neck just feels so good. It's naturally been sealed with hand oils. But I did notice something else while cleaning it. You got side markers, side markers. Uh-oh. The finish is so dark you can't see the non-exposed side markers as easily. There's a cool shot of your almost multicolored binding going on. The only thing that would have made this cooler is if it was like a year later, because then we'd start to see like the flip out winding tuners and all the other special posi lock strap buttons and other shortly lived parts. But now Blacklight time. This is interesting. The finish is so dark. It almost looks like it's not glowing. It does indeed have the green glow to it. You just gotta kind of look at it at an angle. Yeah, interesting. Super, might as well just be pure green alien snot knobs at this point. Pickup rings have that slight glow to them as well. Kind of cool to see the binding glow as much as it does. The headstock's insane, though. Under Blacklight, you can't even make out the Gibson logo and barely even the custom emblem. Here's a look around our edges. You can see super sweat absorption areas. Of course, all the way to our neck and our bare areas. Thankfully, no breaks, cracks, or repairs. Just finish wear and the backside of our headstock. And to wrap it up with the edges, just for fun. What a cool and slightly disgusting treat for today. What's kind of unique about the back, though, is it doesn't look like it's all chewed up with a whole bunch of belt buckle and stuff. It was just the guy's hand and the situation that this one was stored in. But no, if you get it in the light just right, it does have buckle worming all over. He just must not have had a giant buckle to, wear through to the bare wood and really scratch it up. So it was well played, but not abused by any means. I mean, the condition really isn't that bad outside of some finish wear and ambering of everything. Wow, I wasn't expecting it to weigh that much. 10 pounds, 6 ounces. It feels a lot lighter than that. But let's go ahead, plug this one in, and hear how Old Smoky sounds.
I will admit the G-string does not stay in tune worth anything. That's because it's getting hung up somewhere. It's either the saddle or the brass nut. The only other thing I notice is there's some frets up here around the 15th fret that sound just a little bit choked, but with the action just a little bit higher, it does cure that. But if you want to deck this thing to have the most low action possible, you might have to either replace the saddles, replace the bridge, or do a level recrown if you need absolute perfection to play this out on stage. But for the bedroom guitar player, I think you'd be just fine. There we go. Wasn't that just a visual and audio treat? Literal tobacco burst. Absolute awesome stage 4. Kind of reminds me of like a really well worn in violin at the same time. This is a really cool guitar. Whether you're trying to play like sludgy metal stuff or just regular classic rock, I actually really enjoyed the tones out of this one. Now, unfortunately, the playability aspect of it, it needs a little bit of tweaking, but it's relatively small minor changes, but as is, it still plays pretty alright. Just that G string is very annoying. But I'm glad I was able to document this interesting guitar. You know, this one just has so many stories it could tell. Because not only did it live in a high-end cigar place for many years, where I'm sure many a tales were shared, it was also played probably by a lot of different people. But maybe a former owner of it will be able to chime in the comment section. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy this 1984 Super Custom that was played a lot.